Many of you saw the episode on Timcast IRL quite recently where Kanye West walked out at about the 20-minute mark of the episode. For those of you who did not, I'm going to play a few clips for you to just show some of what happened, and then I'll get back to my analysis. Let's go.
When I found out that they tried to put me in jail, it was like a dog was biting my arm, and I almost shed a tear, almost. But I still walked in stride through it. Yeah.
I think they've been extremely unfair to you.
Who was they though? We can't say who they is.
Corporate press. I'm not using I don't use the word as the way I guess you guys use. I'm talking.
It is
about
them though, isn't it? I mean, because
No.
because when you think about it, consider it. In 2018.
What do you mean it's not?
What do I mean? Like, okay, so how about? Are you leaving?
Are you referring to the press?
He's gone. I'll say it right now. You guys want to bring that stuff up, and then
Have
think
the
we're not going
discussion.
to have a
Like,
conversation.
have the discussion.
Like you think he's going to come in here and say, "Here's my pain, here's my suffering." I'm going to say, "I hear you," and then he's going to say, "And it was Jewish people," and I'm going to be like, "Okay, but don't you consider?" It's like, I'm not going to do this. I refuse.
Go, make sure he's cool.
All right, go for it. Luke.
Well, after that, there was about an hour or so more of the show where Tim Pool and several other of his associates came into the room and offered commentary, which some commenters on the internet have called derisive towards Kanye, and others have called, just Tim, reasserting that he did a good job. And of course, just like there are different opinions about if he should have continued talking about Kanye West, there are also different opinions about how Tim Pool did. Some folks believe Tim Pool dropped the ball, so to speak, and was a little bit too assertive in his questioning of Kanye. Other folks, including the influencer class, especially the influencer class, believe that Tim Pool did quite well and should be very proud of himself. Everyone ranging from Jesse Kelly, from the Quartering, from all of these different people, who some of you may know, some of you may not know, all seem to believe that Tim Pool did a wonderful job. I'm not interested in how Tim Pool did as an interviewer. That's a low-resolution question. I'll give my brief opinion, but this is a broader thing. What happened on Timcast IRL last night goes beyond Tim Pool and reflects a larger cultural phenomenon that Kanye West is merely an agent and emissary of. You don't understand the game if you just look at the player. This is what I've been trying to tell all of you in my past few videos, including the last video that I did of the posting of this video, about Kanye West 2024 run. It's not about Kanye West. It's about the phenomenon. So I'll discuss the phenomenon in a second, but I'll talk about Tim Pool's interviewing style for a second. So Tim Pool is naturally a very assertive person. He's naturally someone who likes to get a word in, so to speak. This is not a negative commentary. This is not a value assessment. This is simply a statement of fact. Anyone who watches his stuff for more than a few seconds. And I try not to watch my competition at all, guys, but sometimes when culturally relevant stuff like this happens, I have to. So that came out a little bit, but not a lot, especially compared to his previous interviews. I think that Tim asked necessary questions so as to prevent Mr. West from being able to say things that may be erroneous, that are erroneous rather, with impunity. It is not the job of someone, when you are on their platform, to cater to your every need. It is their duty as a human being in a social context to be civilized and to allow you to say what you must say, but you have to do so in the confines of their framework. This is what a lot of folks don't get. You don't have a right to speak with impunity when you're in somebody else's house. You must adhere to the rules of their house. So that's all I'll say on that. I have no interest in getting involved in that rabbit hole because, again, it's not an important conversation. So, what really was shown last night on Timcast, as Milo and Nick Fuentes both snickered like little imps in the corner, what was really shown, and Kanye walked off, what was really shown was not just the weakness of Kanye West and his supposed presidential aspirations, which again I'm very doubtful of. Again, watch my video on the case against Ye24. What was also shown was the weakness of reactionism as a political and a cultural phenomenon. So, what is reactionism? Reactionism is when there is a cultural response born almost entirely of emotion, rage, or anger towards any given thing happening in the political or social sphere. Now, sometimes these cultural responses, which are primitive in how they are formed, i.e. formed in emotion, can be used for intelligible purposes. You could argue that the American Revolution was an act of reactionism, a reaction to King George's constant encroachments on the private individual and his natural God-given rights, which are discernible through reason and are asserted by and way through political power. Now, while it was a reaction born out of emotion, the founders very quickly created an intellectual foundation for the basis of their reaction. So when a reaction is born from emotion, but it is quickly rationalized and justified on intellectual grounds, it no longer becomes a pursuit of passion, but instead an object of reason and truth. But the problem is, a lot of reactionism is born entirely from the passions. The passions, my friend, displace human reason. When man is governed entirely by his emotions and his passions, he is no longer functioning like a human being. He is indistinguishable from an insect or an animal, because animals are overrun with intuition. They cannot regulate their passions, and they are guided by instinct. But man, being a higher creature, is guided by the fundamental principle of logos, and logos, being order, is reflected through reason. When man regulates his passions, he is functioning as a human being. Now, man without emotions is a robot. But man overrun with emotions is simply nothing more than a plain old animal. That is the distinction. Kanye West's campaign and his little effort here, his project, I would say, is not just fallacious because Kanye West is supposedly crazy or narcissistic or whatever. It's fallacious because it is born out of reactionary sentiment. Kanye said in a Twitter video that he posted that he has since scrubbed due to the controversy that has happened, that he wants policies in America to be guided by Christian principles. Now, this idea completely excludes the fact that America is a nation conceived through many different traditions of thought, many different schools of thought, whether they be religious schools and secular schools. The idea of enlightened popular sovereignty, which came from thinkers like Algernon and Sidney, who many folks don't really hear about, who wrote discourses against the king, or John Locke, or people before them, Montesquieu. Yes, there was certainly religious influences in America that influenced the Constitution, the birth of the Constitution, but these were not domineering. They were a part of a larger effort. So what Kanye's project does is it ignores the founding generation's wisdom. It ignores the intellectual roots of American constitutional order, which is based on classical liberalism, which is based on a kind of secularism and affirmation of natural rights, so on and so forth. And it displaces all this stuff because there is a subset of the culture who happen to be Christians who feel aggrieved by the current culture. Kanye's project assumes that the president is the engineer of society, when society is in fact meant to be the engineer of the government. He has the antecedent displaced because his passions are overrunning him. And when you are overran by passions, you make fallacious arguments. Fallacious arguments cannot stand up to reason and scrutiny, which is why the moment Tim asks, "Who are they?" I don't use the terms you use. Kanye gets up, not because he's crazy, but because he is succumbing to the lowest parts of his humanity. Do you guys not understand? This is not about a commentator. This is not about two people who happen to be engineering Kanye's mental illness. This is not about anyone or anything except the phenomenon of a man not being in full control of himself and not regulating himself in a manner that he should. But so many folks miss the forest for the trees. Why? Because it's easy to do so. Everyone else is doing it. The emphasis is not on understanding ethos. It's by assuming what you think ethos is and making a bunch of cultural statements, whether for clicks, likes, or personal aggrandizement. So if we can accept that being overrun by your passions not only displaces your ability to reason, it by consequence displaces your ability to make coherent arguments, we can then see the fourth point I want to make here. And that is that I think Tim Pool did a fine job discussing what is called the Jewish question. Tim Pool made the point that Kanye's argument suffers from a generalization fallacy. He's correct. He said that the localization effect is a problem. Because just because there are Jewish folks who may do something to you does not mean all Jewish folks are doing that something to you. Now, I think that Tim Pool could have gone much further in this argument. And here's how I would have done it. Essentially, what I would have said is this. There is a problem of proximity when it comes to folks who make outrageous claims about Jewish people. So for those of you who are regular viewers of mine, you'll know what this concept is. This concept of proximity ethics. Proximity ethics is when someone associates someone with something because they are merely near it. It's not guilt by association because that's more direct. You can be in the presence of something and by proximity be indicted by it. So for example, someone may say that Ashkenazi Jews, which make up the largest amount of Jews in the West right now, about 80% by statistical estimations, are proximal to power and influence because there are a lot of Ashkenazi Jews that happen to occupy the higher runs of different industries. Therefore, they benefit from that. Well, the problem of proximity is that it does not answer the question, do qualities or certain qualities confer certain things upon people? Does the mere act of being Jewish confer upon someone wealth, power, and prestige? Of course not. Any logical person would be able to see that. And any person who understands the difference between being near something and being a part of something would also understand that. Is it possible to be proximal to goodness or to evil, to power or to weakness, and not be good or evil or powerful or weak yourself? Of course it is. Because human beings are not entirely dictated by their environment. Again, we are higher creatures. We transcended our environment by and through our ability to organize rationally, peacefully, and voluntarily, and build civilization and understand the world around us. Creative man, primitive man, became civilized man because he understood his creative power and then used that power to claim mastery over the natural world and subjugate it to his desires. And yet, people who have an emaciated view of humanity like Kanye West don't understand that. Don't appreciate that. Because to them, they suffer from the proximity fallacy. They cannot separate what may be man's environment in a particular instance from who man is as a person. That's the biggest issue. That's the biggest problem. Just because, for example, there may be black business owners somewhere in Detroit does not mean I am privy to their wealth or their power. And this is the worst kind of collectivization of people to assume that just because there's a group of people that happen to be in power, it must be due to some sort of nefarious factor. No, it's not. It's due, if you want to know the truth, because a lot of Jewish folks throughout history have been the subject of misunderstanding and persecution in many countries. And so what do? When man becomes persecuted, what he does is he coalesces with people who are like him, and he uses creative energies to renew an effort to survive. This is what every group of folks that has ever dealt with oppression has done, whether it be the American founding fathers, who I love, whether it be African Americans during the Jim Crow era, Black Wall Street, other black enclaves around the country where they coalesced using their energies to create wealth. Whatever it may be, Jewish folks, or at least certain categories of Jewish folks, have done the same thing. Now, Kanye also, his argument also suffers from this problem of specificity because there is all kind of ideological divisions amongst Jewish folks. When people say the Jews, what they're saying is an incoherent statement. Because there are Orthodox Jews, there are Reformed Jews, there are progressive Jews, there are conservative Jews, there are Jewish people who do not like Israel, there are Jewish people who do like Israel. There's all kind of ideological richness within the Jewish tradition, going all the way back to the philosopher Moses Mendelssohn, which me and a friend were currently reading his philosophy book, Jerusalem, where he talks about separation of church and state and all kind of very interesting concepts. There's a rich tradition that is overlooked because people cannot escape the problem of association and proximity. And that is what I think Tim Pool should have pushed back on more forcefully. He should have asked that question more forcefully. Kanye, how do you account for the divisions and the differences within Jewish thought themselves? Kanye, how do you account for the political and social objectives of different categories of Jewish people? Kanye, how do you do all of this? How do you reconcile an Orthodox rabbi with Jonathan Greenblatt, who is a progressive Jew who doesn't really like free speech or whatever? How do you reconcile all these differences? And the rational person says, I reconcile them by seeing people not as products of their identity, but as fundamentally individuals who are unique in their own right, who are not bound up in their mind by any category, and who should be assessed on their own merits. Bigotry requires people not to recognize the concrete individual and to instead live in an abstract reality. I think Tim Pool could have pushed further, and I would have. My friends, embrace the truth of reality. Do not let your passions govern you. Do not let your emotions govern you. And most importantly, recognize one thing. There's the game, and then there's the player. If you want to succeed in this new world that we're going into, you ought to recognize the game and look at the game more than the player. My friends, I love you guys so much. If you love me, be sure to subscribe, like, share this video, comment on this video. Be sure to go to join my Discord community, buy some of my merch, which is the comment section down below. My friends, love you guys so much, and please, forever and eternally, stay pensive. Bye, guys.